Well, once again, time to check in with our 35th District Legislative Representatives, Travis Couture and Dan Griffey. How you doing, guys?
Good.
Great, Jeff.
It is a continued short session. We're about 2 weeks in, and yesterday a lot of behind-the-scenes kind of committee work and meetings as it was a Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So some proclamations on the floor in the House and the Senate, but a lot more of the hard work continues in today. I wanted to talk a little bit about education. It's the 20th. Ballots are going out across Mason County and the 35th for many schools for levies. I think Mason County has 5 or something like that in their upcoming election through the month. We've talked a lot about education, Travis. It's something that you really are passionate about. And talk to me a little bit about how you work with the legislators to kind of help them understand, I guess, kind of the rural nature of the 35th when it comes to education and choice and all things like that.
Yeah. One of the first things to realize is that, you know, we've never spent more money in the K-12 system than we have right now in the state of Washington. As a matter of fact, it's 3 times that of inflation. We're spending well over $20,000 per pupil. But despite this record historic investment by the state of Washington into K-12, what we see on the ground floor level is many of our school districts are going broke. So you kind of scratch your head and think, why is this happening? Where's the money going? How is it getting intercepted? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, and what I tell people is that K-12 funding in the law is one of the most complicated funding mechanisms that we have here in Olympia. There's prototypical school models, there's all sorts of funding formulas and all sorts of things. It's not easy to change, it's not easy to reform. But we have this problem. We have school districts like Shelton, for example, in binding conditions, which means that, well, you're in debt. And obviously it's unacceptable to, have our schools basically on threat of closing down. That can't happen, especially to one of our bigger school districts in our county and in our district, right? And so there needs to be a lot of thoughtful work behind, how do we make K-12 funding work not just for teachers, but for schools, right? And for families and students. But I don't know if there's going to be a substantial kind of reform idea happening in such a short session. I think that there's a lot of legislators, both sides, Democrat and Republican, really trying to dig deep into the system to understand, how do we save our schools from some of this stuff? And some people might point at individual school districts. Maybe some are better or worse fiduciaries of the money that they receive. But we've had these problems, like one-time ESSER COVID funds used for permanent staff and structure. And then on top of that, we have a lot of unfunded mandates coming down from the state, and then whatever the cost of living here is in Washington, gas, groceries, rent, these are all things schools have to buy as well, so they are also subject to those high costs. And so the schools are continuously coming back to the legislature. We need more, we need more, we need more to cover some of the things that you're making us do, some of the things that you've made us do but haven't funded, or some of just the general cost of living here in this state. So there's a lot that needs to be fixed. And if you're a school like in Shelton, for example, who you need a levy in order to pull yourself out of the hole, right? And then also you're in a hole, so there's some voters who don't really trust you if they give you more money. So there's a catch-22 there, and I understand both sides of that argument, and I can't weigh into an ongoing campaign. That would be unethical for me to do, and for Dan as well. But one of the most nefarious things that happened last session, Jeff, was LEA, Local Effort Assistance. This is levy equalization for districts like ours, rural districts with rural schools. We have lower property values. And what the legislature did last session is basically what I call a reverse Robin Hood. They took from the poor school districts to give it to the rich, the money to the rich school districts. So if you're in Mercer Island in Seattle, you've got this big windfall. You can just barely do anything and receive tons and tons of levy funds. But the McCleary decision back in the day, which was supposed to equalize the use of levies and that inequality between poor and rich, property rich school districts, right? And many of the poor, property poor school districts are in rural areas like ours. So that LEA funds was supposed to help level the playing field for us, because when we raise a levy, we have to almost max out in order to get anything, where the property rich districts barely have to raise anything at all and get this huge windfall. So what they did is they took that LEA matching funds from the state away from school districts like ours. And what that simply means is that the schools in our district have to ask for the same or more and get less back in return. And that ultimately harms our kids' opportunities as far as enrichment. And one other thing I'll say, maybe this is a little bit more uncomfortable. I think it's got to be said, though. When you are giving contracts out at 7 to 11% increases every year, and then you have to rely on either money from the state, which we can't give because we're in a $4.3 billion deficit, or you have to rely and pray to God that your community raises a levy or something else. That's a bad financial position to be in, but many of the schools feel like we have to sign on to these really great, big, huge contracts that you would never, ever see in the private sector. And we have to get the levy in order to help pay for that. And that's one of the reasons, among many other, that we're in binding conditions in some of our districts, or close to it, right, in other districts. And so there needs to be some protection of schools in the system so that they're not feeling like I have to sign a contract that I know I can't pay unless I win on a levy campaign, or something else, because they're afraid that in this state that you will get a strike the first day of school, and nobody wants a strike. Parents don't want to be interrupted like that. And right now in Washington State, as of the first of the year, if you strike in Washington as a school teacher, you can get essentially paid to be on strike, unemployment. So I think this is kind of stuff going in the wrong direction, but I sense the struggle between the two sides. And what I'd say to people in the community is, like, there's good reasons to support, and then also good reasons to understand why people are so strapped they can't afford it, right? It's not that they hate schools or kids. They have nothing else left to give, right? And people need to put that into their head, that there's people out there who are less fortunate than us, but that would be subject to some of this. And so a little bit of understanding on both sides, a little bit of understanding of what the legislature has done to put us into this position. And I think that going forward, probably into the next long session, there will be more robust talks about how we reform that system.
Dan, let's talk to you a little bit about some of the programs that you are championing over the years in your time. Give us a wave so your energy efficient lights turn back on. We want to see you here. There we go.
Ain't going on. We can't do it.
All right. So
technology's kicking her butt.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the safety and security that you work on here when it comes to sexual assault victim survivors and things like that. You've made a lot of headway over these last couple years in the ledge on both sides of the aisle, working together on ways to reform and update and help protect some of these victims. What can you do, I think, this short session to keep that momentum going?
I don't have a bill number yet, Jeff, but I know you and I have talked over the past. Travis and I are working on sexually violent predators and community release. We want to make sure that we reform that system. It's a bipartisan effort. We've identified the problems, but we're once again doubling down on that, and we're kind of nipping away at the edges. We're mandating that when they're in at the SEC, that they have to materially participate in their treatment, their adversion treatment. Right now, over 50% of those that are housed at the SEC are not participating in any meaningful treatments. We'll be running a bipartisan bill on that. There'll be a Democrat co-sponsor. Same Democrat, Mari Levitt, who has had Travis and I's back through this whole thing, like really pushing us through. I'm also working on getting our toxicology lab samples brought in a time frame, a good time frame. Right now, Jeff, prosecutors are not on very serious DUI under the influence cases where there might be an injury. They have to wait on the toxicology crime lab's report. So they would do a blood draw. The toxicology lab in the state would give that out. We have constitutional rights to a speedy trial. So what prosecutors are doing are shelving a lot of those really serious ones until they get the toxicology report, and then charging 2 years 2 years past the incident happening. But in those 2 years, Jeff, they've had nearly zero sanctions, and a lot of them are committing second and third and fourth DUIs and putting society at risk. So we're trying to do private toxicology labs, those certified labs in Washington State, to assist WSP in doing that. We did that with the sake kits. If you remember right, when I first got in Olympia, we had that backlog of the rape collection kits. We weren't doing the sampling for a myriad of reasons. We decided that we could solve other crimes if we had that good DNA profile in there of those that could do those crimes. So I'm continuing to work in that space. I'm doubling down in that space. I'm also working to protect our law enforcement, some pretty egregious bills. There's one bill here in Olympia, Jeff, that says our law enforcement agencies can't train by other foreign entities or foreign militaries. Well, the Israelis almost invented counterterrorism, Jeff, and for this state to prohibit law enforcement officers from seeking counterterrorism training, dealing with IEDs. I know an IED isn't something that American citizens have to deal with on a daily basis, U.S. citizens. But wouldn't it be nice if we had people that were thinking about it if it came here? Also, drone technology. Most other countries, other foreign countries have dealt with drones and how to deal with drones domestically. They know how to do it. We're going to prohibit them from doing that. So they want to have individual personal liability for law enforcement officers if they are to put mask coverings on. Right now in Washington State, to put a covering over a law enforcement officer's face, they have to have markings both on their front, on their rear, and their name has to be clearly established. And they can only do it in cold weather or safety and security themselves to prevent disease spread, that sort of thing. The majority party wants to establish a liability, a personal liability, so those individuals on the street could actually sue those law enforcement officers if they see them with that face piece on. So we have a lot of work to do here in Olympia, Jeff, and as always, I think the majority is going the wrong direction, and we have to make sure we keep us on the straight and narrow path.
The backlog of the kits and even the training outside of the United States, it seems to me some of this is kind of, in a sense, like an outsourcing issue. Is it because of certification that the independent third-party agencies or businesses can't run these tests, or what's the holdup there on some of those?
So right now, the Washington State Crime Lab is the holdup. The State Patrol runs the crime lab. The State Patrol asked for, and I sponsored a budget proviso last year to give them the money they needed to buy their equipment. They now tell us they need $3 million more, which is what happens from every state agency. You give them $14 million and they need $3 million more. What is incumbent upon me is to look at their request aggressively and see if they can pull it off with this $3 million. I believe, and look, they bought the equipment they said they were going to buy. That's good. I have to confirm that. Now, how are we going to operate this? Well, the cost of those forensic, they're not only a forensic tester, Jeff, they have to be trained to also present that evidence in a criminal court of law. So they also have to be proficient at delivery of the information, because the person who collects a sample and determines the value, right, whether it be impaired or not impaired, right, that person has to be able to sample that, be able to deliver that sample in a prosecutable way to the courts. Those people are expensive. So what we're trying to do is do a stopgap. Say if you're a certified lab in Washington State, you follow all of the state crime lab testing and that delivery of the information in the courtroom. That we're going to try that out and see if we can speed this up and we can start getting those that commit terrible DUIs to trial sooner. And we think that this is kind of a creative way to do it. Other states do it.
You mentioned with the rape kit backlog that oftentimes you're able to, through that DNA evidence, find matches when it comes to other cases. Do you have any information or numbers on any other crimes, lower level crimes that?
Absolutely. So that's the one good thing, that now that we have a robust amount of DNA profiles in the CODIS database, we're solving a lot of other crimes, not just sexually motivated crimes. I do believe, don't quote me on this, but I do believe Representative Orwell, who Senator Orwell now, who I championed, I really worked to champion this idea set, it was hers, says that we have closed 2 murder cases also with that DNA database. So again, if you're a criminal, you don't like that database, and it gives law enforcement an ability to go after those DNA profiles you leave once you injure society.
2 big topics that I know both of you guys are very passionate about: their safety and security and education. I appreciate your time, and we're running up on it here. I know you guys have tons of more meetings to get to, but we'll check in next week on this as that short session, it keeps moving forward. Thank you so much, guys. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice seeing you, Jeff. Thanks so much.